My name is Claire Harlan, and I still walk the orchard before I check my bank account. That one habit tells people more about me than any job application or social media profile ever could. I am 23 years old. I live alone in the same ranch-style house my grandparents bought in 1971 on the outer edge of Traverse City, Michigan. The aluminum siding is faded. The porch steps creak on the second tread, no matter how many times I try to fix them. The kitchen still holds the faint smell of old coffee and wood smoke even though no one has made a full pot in months. Behind the house sit 62 acres. Long rows of cherry trees that need more attention than one person can easily give, mixed hardwoods that turn deep red and gold every October, and a quiet stretch of shoreline on a small inland like the locals simply call Harlan Water. Developers say the raw land is worth close to $2 million. I say it is worth more than that, and I mean something completely different when I say those words. People hear the number and assume I am being stubborn or overly sentimental. They are not entirely wrong, but they are missing the real difference. Value is what someone is willing to write on a check at closing. Valuable is what the place continues to say when you stand still long enough to listen. I learned that difference slowly, and then all at once. The first serious offer arrived the spring after my grandmother died. A man from a development firm in Grand Rapids drove up in a black SUV that still carried temporary paper tags. He walked the property the way people walk land they already believe they will own. He pointed at the shoreline and talked about view corridors and highest and best use. He offered $1.8 million, cash, with a 30-day close. My brother Ethan sat at the kitchen table when the number was spoken out loud. I watched his face change the way it always does when he starts calculating. He was 31 then, working construction jobs that came and went, married, with 2 young children, and a mortgage that never seemed to get lighter. He looked at me the way people look when they believe they are the practical one in the room. "Claire," he said, "be smart." I told him I was trying. He thought I meant with the money. I meant with the rest of my life. We grew up on this land. Summers used to feel endless. We swam off the old wooden dock until our lips turned blue. We climbed the same sugar maple every July and carved our initials a little higher each year. Grandpa taught both of us how to prune, how to tell a healthy tree from one that was already failing, how to listen for the sound of wind moving through strong leaves versus the dry rattle of something dying. Ethan learned the skills. I learned the reasons behind them. When we were teenagers, he started talking about what the place could be worth someday. I started talking about how the soil smelled after a long, steady rain. Grandma used to say we were 2 different kinds of Harlans. She never made it sound like one was better than the other. She just said it the way people talk about the weather. After she was gone, the difference between us grew louder. I began keeping a notebook the way Grandpa used to, not for numbers or budgets, for the things the land kept saying back if you paid attention. April 12, first morel under the big oak, same exact spot as last year. May 3, orioles returned, nest in the same crotch of the maple. June 18, lake water finally warm enough to swim without gasping. The dock still lists slightly to the left. July 9, found the old fence post Grandpa replaced the summer I was 9. The new wood is weathered now, almost the same color as the original. These notes do not pay the property taxes. They do not fix the aging tractor. They do not silence the late notices that arrive in plain white envelopes from the county. But they keep me honest. They remind me that the land is still keeping its own quiet score. The second offer came 6 months later. Same firm, higher number, $2.1 million. They even added a clause that said I could keep the house and 5 acres for $1 if I signed over the rest. Ethan called the same night the email arrived. His voice was careful. 2.1, Claire. That's more than the last appraisal. You could buy something smaller in town and still have money left over. You could finish school without loans. You could travel. You could do anything you want. I was standing on the porch, watching the lake turn the color of old pewter. A pair of loons called back and forth across the water. The sound carried the way it only does when the air is cold and completely still. I said, I already do something. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're going to lose it anyway. The taxes keep going up. The equipment is old. You're 23 and you're out there alone. Something is going to break one of these days and you won't be able to fix it." He was not wrong about the numbers. He was wrong about nearly everything else. I used to believe the hardest part would be saying no to the money. It was not. The hardest part was saying no to the quieter version of myself that wanted the easier story. The version that imagined a clean bank account, a smaller house closer to town, weekends that did not involve frost warnings or broken equipment. That version of me still shows up sometimes, usually at 3 in the morning when the wind is loud against the windows and the furnace makes that strange ticking sound again. I let her talk. Then I remind her of the notebook. Last October, the county sent another notice. The taxes had increased once more. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter, a calculator, and the same tight knot in my stomach that arrives every fall. For the first time, I seriously considered calling the number on the most recent offer letter. Instead, I drove out to the far edge of the orchard. The trees were nearly bare. The ground was soft from recent rain. I walked until I reached the spot where Grandpa used to sit on an overturned bucket and watch the light change over the water. The bucket was long gone, so I sat on the damp ground. I stayed until my legs went numb and the sky turned that deep, late autumn blue that only appears for a few weeks each year. I did not have a sudden grand revelation. I simply remembered something Grandma said the last summer she was still well. We were shelling peas on the porch. She looked out at the rows of trees and said, almost to herself, "People think land is something you own. It's not. It's something that lets you stay long enough to become part of it. Once that happens, selling it starts to feel like selling a piece of your own name." I did not fully understand her then. I understand her now. Ethan came out the following weekend with the children. They ran through the orchard laughing and collecting sticks. His wife stayed in the car with the heat running. Ethan and I stood near the old sugar maple. Then he said it again, softer this time. "You could still change your mind." I watched the kids. The older one, a girl named June, stopped running and pressed her small hand against the bark of the maple the same way I used to when I was her age. "I know," I said. He waited. I did not add anything else. He left before dark. The children waved from the back seat until the car disappeared down the long gravel drive. I stood in the quiet until the dust settled and the evening sounds returned. That night I sat at the kitchen table and opened the old notebook again. I added one more line. October 14, kids ran the rows today. June touched the maple the same way I did. The tree is still here. So am I. Winter arrived earlier than usual that year. The lake froze solid. The orchard went silent under a heavy blanket of snow. Most evenings I spent repairing what I could and writing in the notebook by the wood stove. Some nights the wind made the old house sound as if it were breathing. On those nights I walked from room to room turning on lights, not because I was afraid of the dark, but because I needed the reminder that I was still choosing to stay. In January, another letter arrived. The offer had increased by another $100,000. The language was polite, patient, full of careful phrases about opportunity and thoughtful legacy planning. I placed the letter in the drawer with the others. I did not open that drawer again for 3 weeks. In early March, the snow finally began to melt. The ground turned soft and dark and full of the smell that only appears after a long winter. I walked every row looking for winter damage the way Grandpa had taught me. Most of the trees had survived. A few had not. I marked them with orange flagging tape. By the end of the day, my hands were cold and cracked, but the work felt steady and familiar. That evening, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of tea and watched the light change over the water. The same pair of loons, or perhaps a new pair, had returned. They called to each other across the still surface. I thought about the offers. I thought about the numbers. I thought about the easier life that still waited on the other side of a single signature. Then I thought about the notebook, the maple tree, the dock that still lists slightly to the left, the way the soil smells after rain, and the simple fact that my name is on the title on every late notice, and somehow quietly in the land itself now. Value is a number someone else decides. Valuable is what remains when the number is no longer the point. I finished the tea. I went back inside. I added one more line to the notebook. March 19, lake ice gone. Loons back, I am still here. I closed the book and set it on the table. Outside, the light kept changing the way it always has, whether anyone is watching or not. I am still watching. And for now, that is enough. Spring always arrives in pieces out here. First, the snow pulls back from the south-facing rows. Then the ground softens and turns that deep, almost black color that only shows up for a few weeks. The air starts carrying the smell of wet bark and last year's leaves. The morning after I wrote that March 19 entry, I woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves. The lake was completely open. A thin mist hung just above the surface. I made coffee, pulled on the same work jacket I had worn all winter, and walked the orchard before the sun fully cleared the trees. Most of the cherries had made it. A few of the older ones on the north edge showed winter kill. I marked them with orange flagging tape the way Grandpa taught me. The tape is cheap and ugly, but it keeps me honest. I spent the rest of that morning sharpening tools in the small shed behind the house. The shed still smells like oil and old wood, and the faint trace of the pipe tobacco Grandpa used to smoke when Grandma was not looking. I sat on the same overturned crate he used and worked the file along the blade of the pruning saw until the edge felt right under my thumb. My mind kept drifting to the drawer in the kitchen, where the offer letters sat. I did not open the drawer. Instead, I made a second cup of coffee and carried it down to the dock. I sat with my legs hanging over the edge the way I did when I was 12 and listened to the water move against the pilings. A kingfisher rattled somewhere along the opposite shore. I thought about the number again, 2.2 million now. I tried to picture what that amount would look like in a bank account. I tried to picture a smaller house in town, maybe near the college, with reliable heat and a driveway that did not turn to mud every spring. The pictures came easily enough. What did not come easily was the feeling that any of those pictures belonged to me. Ethan called on a Tuesday evening in early April. His voice sounded tired in the particular way it gets when the construction work has been slow. "Just checking in," he said. We talked about the weather for a few minutes. He asked if I had thought any more about the offer. I told him I had. "And," he said, "I'm still here." There was a long pause. "Claire, I'm not trying to push you. The kids are growing so fast. June starts kindergarten in the fall. We're behind on everything. If we sold, even half of that money would change things for us. It would change things for you too." I looked out the kitchen window at the rows of trees. The evening light was turning them a soft gold. "I know it would change things," I said. "That's what I'm afraid of." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, quieter, "You sound like Grandpa." "Maybe that's not the worst thing." He gave a short, tired laugh. "No, maybe not. But Grandpa never had to pay these taxes, and he never had 2 kids who needed new shoes every 3 months. I did not argue with him. There was nothing to argue. He was telling the truth as he lived it. I was living a different truth on the same land. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a long time. I opened the notebook and wrote. April 8, Ethan called. He is tired. I am tired too, but in a different way. The trees are starting to show green at the tips. I will prune the marked ones tomorrow. The next morning, I started on the north edge. The work was steady and physical. My shoulders ached by noon. I ate a sandwich sitting on the tailgate of the old Ford and watched a pair of sandhill cranes move across the far field in their slow, deliberate way. That night, I dreamed of the maple tree. In the dream, I was a child again, climbing higher than I was allowed, and Grandma was calling from the ground that I would fall. I did not fall. I just kept climbing until the branches thinned and the whole orchard spread out below me like a map I somehow already knew. I woke before dawn with the dream still close. I made coffee and carried it outside while the sky was still dark blue. The first birds were just beginning. I thought about the difference again. Value is clean. It fits on a spreadsheet. It can be transferred with a signature and a wire. It does not care who you are or how long you have stayed. Valuable is slower. It collects in small layers, the way the dock lists, the way the same morels come up in the same place, the way a child presses her hand to a tree her great-grandfather once pruned. It does not transfer easily. Sometimes it does not transfer at all. I finished the coffee and went inside to get the saw. There was still work to do. By the middle of April, the orchard was fully awake. The buds had broken. The air smelled green. I worked long days and slept hard at night. The notebook filled with short entries. April 12, morels again under the oak, 3 this year. April 17, first real leaves on the maples. April 22, rain last night. Ground soft, tractor will have to wait. April 25, found a fox den near the back fence. Tracks fresh. One afternoon, I drove into town for groceries and to drop off the property tax payment I had been saving for. The clerk at the county office was the same woman who had been there for years. She glanced at the amount and then at me. "Still holding on out there?" she asked. "Still holding on," I said. She nodded once, as if that answer made sense to her, and processed the payment. On the way home, I stopped at the small hardware store. The man behind the counter asked how the trees were looking. I told him most had made it through the winter. He said that was good news and handed me my change. Small conversations like that are easy to overlook. But they are part of what the land keeps too, the ordinary recognition that you are still here, still doing the work, still choosing the slower thing. Ethan came out again on a Saturday near the end of the month. This time he came alone. We worked side by side on a section of fence that had leaned over during the winter. When we finished, we sat on the tailgate of the Ford and drank water from the same jug. "I talked to a guy at work," he said eventually. "His brother sold a place up near Charlevoix last year, similar size, got close to what they're offering you." I nodded. "I'm not going to keep asking," he said. "I just want you to know the door is still open. If you change your mind, I'll help with whatever needs doing." "I know," I said. He looked out at the rows of trees. The new leaves were bright in the afternoon light. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" The question was quieter than the others he had asked. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes, but not in the way people think. It's not the kind of lonely that gets fixed by moving to town." He was silent for a long moment. "I used to love it here," he said. "When we were kids, I really did. Then life got heavier and the place started looking like a number instead of a place." "I know. You're still able to see it the old way." "Some days," I said. "Not every day, but enough days." When he left that evening, he hugged me at the car, something he had not done in a long time. After he was gone, I walked to the maple and put my hand on the bark the way June had done. The tree was cool and solid under my palm. May arrived with warmer days and the first real push of growth. The cherry trees began to show white at the tips of the branches. I knew the blossom period would be short and intense. I also knew that a late frost could still take most of the crop. That knowledge sat in the back of my mind the way it always had, not as fear exactly, but as a steady awareness that the land did not make promises. I spent the early mornings walking the rows with a cup of coffee, checking the progress of the buds. The notebook collected more lines. May 3, blossoms starting on the south rows. May 7, full bloom on the early trees. Bees everywhere. May 9, cold night. Watch the temperature until 3 a.m. held at 34. Close. On the morning of May 9, I stood in the dark orchard with a flashlight and a thermometer, the same way Grandpa used to. When the sky finally began to lighten and the temperature held just above freezing, I felt the particular relief that only people who grow things understand. It is not celebration. It is simply the quiet knowledge that the land and the weather have agreed, for now, to let the season continue. That afternoon, I sat on the porch and watched the bees work the blossoms. The air was full of the light, sweet scent of the flowers. The thought of the offers felt more distant than it had in winter. The land was busy. It was doing the thing it knew how to do. My job was simply to stay out of the way as much as possible and take care of what I could. I opened the notebook and wrote, May 9, frost held off. Blossoms safe for now. The trees are doing their work. I am still here doing mine. Value would have me leave before the blossoms even opened. Valuable asks me to stay and see what the season becomes. I chose the second one again, the same way I had chosen it every day since the first letter arrived. The choice did not feel dramatic. It simply felt like the next true thing. The blossoms lasted 9 days. By the middle of May, the petals had begun to fall in slow, uneven drifts. I walked the rows every morning with coffee, watching the shift from white to green. The bees stayed busy. The air kept that light, sweet smell until the last petals dropped. I wrote in the notebook, May 18, petals nearly gone. Tiny green cherries starting. The trees have moved on, so have I a little. The work changed with the season. Pruning gave way to watching for pests and checking the irrigation lines. Some of the lines leaked. I spent 2 full days replacing cracked sections, kneeling in the dirt with a pipe cutter and a roll of tape. My knees ached by the end of each day. The ache felt honest. One afternoon near the end of May, a truck I did not recognize came up the drive. A man in his 50s stepped out, wearing a clean work shirt and a baseball cap with a seed company logo. He introduced himself as Tom Reller. He managed a larger orchard about 20 miles south and had heard I was working the old Harlan place alone. He asked if I needed any help with the spray schedule or the thinning later in the season. I thanked him and said I was managing for now. He nodded and looked out at the rows for a long moment. These old plantings can still produce, he said. They just need someone willing to stay with them. Most people your age want something faster. I'm not most people, I said. He gave a small smile, as if that answer did not surprise him, and left a business card on the porch railing. After he drove away, I stood looking at the card for a while. Then I put it in the kitchen drawer next to the offer letters. Different kind of paper. Same quiet presence. June came in warm and steady. The cherries began to size up. The days stretched longer. I started waking even earlier so I could walk the orchard while the light was still soft. The notebook collected more short lines. June 2, first real heat. Crickets at night again. June 9, thinning the heavy clusters by hand. Slow work, fingers sticky. June 14, found a fawn bedded down near the back fence. Mother watching from the trees. June 21, longest day. Sat on the dock until the last light left the water. The financial pressure did not disappear just because the trees were growing. The next tax installment was due in July. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the calculator and the latest county notice and felt the old tightness return in my chest. I opened the drawer and looked at the most recent offer letter. The number was still there, clean and large. For a few minutes, I let myself imagine calling the number, signing the papers, and walking away with enough money to erase every late notice and still have plenty left. The imagining was easy. The feeling that came with it was not. I closed the drawer again and went outside. The evening air was warm. Fireflies had started appearing in the lower field. I walked down to the maple and sat with my back against the trunk. A barred owl called from somewhere near the lake. I thought about Grandma's words again. That land is not something you own so much as something that lets you stay long enough to become part of it. Sitting there with the rough bark against my back, I understood more clearly than before how the opposite is also true. Once you have stayed long enough, leaving starts to feel like cutting away a piece of yourself that will not grow back cleanly. Ethan called on a Wednesday evening in late June. The kids were noisy in the background. He sounded more tired than the last time. June's birthday is next month, he said. We're trying to do something small at the park. You should come. I'll be there. There was a pause. Then he said, The firm called me last week. They wanted to know if I'd talked to you lately. I told them you were still thinking. I am still thinking, I said, just not in the direction they want. He let out a long breath. Claire, I need to say this plain. We're in a corner over here. The truck needs a new transmission. The rent on the storage unit went up. I'm working every job I can get and it's still not enough. If you sold, even a fair split would get us out from under some of this. It would help you too. I looked out the window at the darkening orchard. The fireflies were thicker now. I know you're in a hard place, I said. I'm not ignoring that, but selling this place would only fix the numbers. It wouldn't fix the rest of it. What rest of it? The part that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I used to understand that part. I really did. Then the bills started stacking up and the understanding got harder to hold on to. I know, I said. I'm not judging you for it. I know you're not. That's what makes this harder. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and let the conversation settle. There was no clean answer that would make both of us feel right at the same time. Sometimes the valuable thing for one person is the costly thing for another, even when they come from the same family and the same land. I opened the notebook and wrote, June 25, Ethan is struggling. I am staying. Both of those things are true at the same time. The cherries are coloring. Another week and the earliest ones will be ready. The first ripe cherries came in early July. I picked a small bucket by hand one evening and sat on the porch eating them while the juice ran down my wrist. They were tart and sweet in the exact way I remembered from childhood. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the taste pull the old summers closer. The next morning, I called Tom Reller. I told him I would take him up on the offer of advice about the harvest timing and the local market options. He drove out that same afternoon and walked the rows with me, tasting fruit, checking color, talking about sugar levels and the best windows for picking. He did not push me toward selling. He simply treated the place as a working orchard that still had life in it. You've kept these trees in better shape than I expected, he said at one point. That matters more than people think. After he left, I stood in the row for a long time. The compliment was small, but it landed in the same place the notebook entries did, as quiet proof that staying had not been wasted effort. July brought the full heat and the real work of harvest. I picked early in the mornings while the air was still cool, filling lugs and loading them into the back of the Ford. Some days Tom sent a couple of his seasonal workers over for a few hours. I paid them what I could from the fruit sales at the small roadside stand I set up near the end of the drive. The stand was nothing fancy, a folding table, a handwritten sign, a coffee can for money. People stopped. Some were locals who remembered my grandparents. Some were tourists heading toward the bay. A few asked questions about the trees and whether the place would still be here next year. I always answered the same way. As long as I'm here, it will be. One woman in her 60s bought 2 quarts and then stood looking out at the rows for a long moment. My parents had a place like this, she said. They sold it in the 90s. I still drive past the spot sometimes. It's all houses now. I wish they had waited. I did not know what to say to that, so I simply nodded. She paid, thanked me, and drove away. After she left, I sat on the edge of the table and looked at the same rows she had been watching. The cherries hung dark and heavy in the afternoon light. The air smelled of warm fruit and dust from the drive. I thought about the woman and her parents, and the houses that had replaced whatever had been there before. I thought about the letters in the drawer and the clean number that would make so many practical problems disappear. Then I thought about the taste of the first ripe cherry of the season, and the way the juice had run down my wrist, and the simple fact that I had been here to taste it. Value would have sold the trees before the fruit even ripened. Valuable is being present when the fruit is ready, even when the work is hard and the money is thin. I picked up the next empty lug and walked back into the rows. There was still fruit to bring in, and I was still here to bring it. The harvest stretched through most of July. Some mornings the air was already warm by 6 o'clock. I picked until my shoulders burned. On the heavier days, Tom's seasonal workers came for a few hours. We worked mostly in silence. When the workers left, I continued alone until the light began to change. The roadside stand did better than I expected. A few regulars started appearing every 3 or 4 days. One older man always bought 2 quarts and asked the same question. Trees still holding up? I always gave the same answer. They're holding. He would nod as if that was all he needed to hear and drive away. I kept a small notebook in the stand for sales. At the end of each day, I added the total to the larger notebook I kept in the house. The numbers were modest, but they were real. They came from the trees I had pruned and watched and stayed with. That mattered more than the size of the total. One evening near the end of July, I sat on the porch steps with a bowl of the last cherries of the day. The juice stained my fingers the same dark red it always had. The lake was calm. A thin line of clouds sat low on the horizon, turning pink as the sun dropped. I thought about the drawer in the kitchen again. The number on the most recent letter could have erased every money worry I carried. It could have made the tax notices disappear. It could have given Ethan the breathing room he kept asking for. I ate another cherry and let the thought sit without pushing it away. Then I looked out at the rows. The trees were tired from the season but still standing. Somewhere near the back fence, a deer stepped out, paused, and went back into the shadows. The ordinary life of the place continued whether I watched it or not. The difference was that I was still here to see it. Value would have ended this season before it began. Valuable is sitting on the steps with stained fingers, knowing the fruit came from trees that still recognize the person who stays. I wrote in the notebook before bed. July 28, last heavy picking day. Stan did well, hands tired, heart quieter than it has been in months, still here. August brought a different kind of work. The trees needed water more often. The grass between the rows grew fast and thick. I spent long mornings on the old tractor, mowing what I could. The tractor overheated twice. Both times I sat in the shade of the maple waiting for it to cool, drinking water from a jug and listening to the insects in the grass. The waiting felt like part of the work now. Ethan brought the children out on a Saturday in the second week of August. June was taller. Her little brother, Sam, had started talking in short, serious sentences. They ran through the lower field while Ethan and I sat on the tailgate of the Ford. He looked more worn than the last time I had seen him. Transmission finally gave out, he said. Had to put a used one in, cost more than I wanted to spend. I waited. I got offered overtime at a site in Cadillac, he continued. 6 days a week for the next 2 months. It'll help, but I won't be around much. The kids will miss you. I know, he rubbed a hand over his face. Claire, I'm not going to ask again about the land. I need you to know that. But if you ever decide, just call me first, okay? Don't let those developers talk you into something without someone in your corner. I will, I said. He nodded and looked out at the children. June had found a long stick and was drawing shapes in the dirt. Sam was trying to catch grasshoppers with both hands. They still love it out here, he said quietly, even if I don't know how to love it the same way anymore. They can keep loving it, I said. That doesn't have to stop. When they left that evening, June hugged me hard and said she wanted to come back when the leaves changed. I told her she could. After the car disappeared, I walked down to the place where she had been drawing in the dirt. The shapes were already starting to fade. The first real cool night arrived near the end of August. I woke to the sound of the wind moving differently through the trees. When I stepped outside, the air had that clean edge that means summer is starting to loosen its hold. A few leaves on the maples had already turned. Not many, just enough to notice. I spent the morning repairing a section of fence that had started to lean again. While I worked, I let my mind turn over the same question it had turned over for more than a year. What would I be protecting if I sold? The answer always came back the same. I would be protecting the numbers, the comfort, the easier version of the next few years. I would not be protecting the thing that had shaped me. I would not be protecting the quiet record the land had been keeping, the maple, the dock that still listed, the same morels in the same place, the way the light moved across the water in late summer, the fact that a child named June had pressed her hand to a tree her great-grandfather once cared for. Value is transferable. Valuable is not. I finished the fence and walked down to the lake. The water was darker now. I sat on the dock and let my legs hang over the edge. A small fish rose and left a ring on the surface. Then another. The ordinary life of the place continued. I stayed until the air grew cooler and the first bats started moving above the water. When I finally walked back to the house, the sky had turned that deep blue that only appears for a short time each evening. I turned on the kitchen light, opened the notebook, and wrote one more line. August 29, first cool night. A few maple leaves turning. Fence fixed again. Still here, still choosing the slower thing. I closed the book and set it on the table. Outside, the wind moved through the trees the way it always had. I listened for a while before I went to bed. September arrived quietly. The mornings turned cooler. The mist over the lake lasted longer. The maples along the drive began to show real color, first a few branches of red, then whole sections turning at once. I walked the orchard earlier each day, jacket zipped, coffee warm in my hands. The cherries were long finished. The trees looked lighter without the weight of fruit. I spent the first week of September clearing the space under the older trees, raking the early fallen leaves into low piles, and moving them to the compost area Grandpa had started decades ago. At the end of each day, I sat on the porch steps and watched the light change across the water. The notebook collected new lines. September 3, first hard red on the big maple. September 8, raked under the north rose. Found the old pruning saw I lost last spring. September 12, cool enough for a second blanket at night, lake darker in the mornings. The financial pressure had not disappeared. One evening, I opened the kitchen drawer again and looked at the most recent offer letter. The number was unchanged. Large, clean, patient. I held the paper for a long time without reading the words. Then I put it back and closed the drawer. I did not call the number. Instead, I drove into town the next morning and paid the smaller bills I could manage. At the hardware store, the man behind the counter asked how the fall colors were looking out my way. I told him the maples were starting early this year. He nodded and said that usually meant a colder winter. Ethan called on a Thursday evening in the middle of September. The overtime in Cadillac was keeping him busy. He sounded exhausted but steady. June keeps asking when we can come see the leaves, he said. She remembers what you told her in August. They're turning, I said. Tell her the big maple is already half red. There was a short silence. Then he said, I drove past a new development on the way home yesterday. Used to be an old orchard. Now it's all framed houses and temporary driveways. Looked at it and thought about your place. I waited. I'm not asking, he said quickly. I understood something for a minute while I was looking at those houses. Once it's gone in a way you can't undo. I used to think that was just sentiment. Now I'm not so sure. The words surprised me. Thank you for saying that, I said. Don't thank me yet. I still need the money. That part hasn't changed. But I see the other side more clearly than I did a year ago. After we hung up, I stayed at the table for a long time. Something in the conversation had shifted, even if the practical problem remained the same. Ethan was still under pressure. I was still choosing to stay, but the space between those two truths felt a little less sharp than it had before. I opened the notebook and wrote. September 18, Ethan called. He saw a developed orchard and understood something. The maple is half red. I am still here. The real color came in the last week of September. The maples turned fully. The oaks held their green longer, then began to shift toward bronze. The air smelled different, drier, sharper, full of the scent of leaves starting to break down. I walked the property more slowly now. The dock boards felt cooler under my bare feet in the mornings. The water near the shore had that clear, cold look that comes before the deeper chill of October. One afternoon, I found a small stack of letters in the mailbox. One was from the county, another reminder about the upcoming tax due date. I carried them inside and set them on the table. For a moment, the old tightness returned in my chest. I breathed through it. Then I made a second cup of coffee and carried it down to the maple. I sat with my back against the trunk and looked up through the red leaves. A few leaves let go while I watched and drifted down around me. The tree did not seem concerned about the leaving. It simply continued. I thought about the difference one more time. Value is what can be measured, transferred, and spent. Valuable is what remains after the measuring is done. The record the land keeps. The quiet proof that someone stayed long enough to become part of the place. The fact that a child can still press her hand to the same bark her great-grandfather once touched. I could sell. The door was still open. The number was still waiting. The practical relief would be real and immediate. But the relief would come at the cost of the thing that had shaped the person I had become. I stayed under the maple until the air grew cooler and the light began to fade. When I finally walked back to the house, the first stars were visible above the lake. I turned on the kitchen light, opened the notebook, and added one more line. September 27, full color on the maple. Sat under it until nearly dark. The tree is letting go of its leaves without fear. I am still learning how to do the same with the things that do not matter and how to hold the things that do. Still here. I closed the book. Outside, a light wind moved through the colored leaves, and the sound of them was soft and steady in the gathering dark. October came in with colder mornings and a deeper quiet. The maples dropped their leaves in long, uneven waves. One strong wind in the second week stripped most of the red from the big tree near the house. The ground beneath it turned bright for a few days, then faded as the leaves began to darken and settle into the grass. I raked what I could and left the rest. The orchard looked open again, the way it always did after the color passed. I walked the rows more slowly now. The work of the growing season was finished. What remained was preparation for the colder months, checking the equipment, covering the outdoor faucets, bringing in the tools that could not stay in the shed through a hard freeze. The tasks were familiar. My hands knew them without much thought. The notebook collected the last entries of the year. October 5, big maple nearly bare. Ground bright with leaves for now. October 12, first hard frost. Grass silver in the morning, lake very still. October 19, split the last of the wood. Stack covered, ready as I can be. The tax notice sat on the kitchen table for 3 days before I dealt with it. I paid what I could from the harvest money and the bookkeeping work and arranged a short extension for the rest. It was not comfortable. It was manageable. I wrote the confirmation number in the notebook and closed the book. I did not open the drawer with the offer letters that week. Ethan brought the children out on a clear Saturday near the end of October. The air was sharp and bright. June ran straight to the maple and stood looking up at the nearly bare branches. Sam followed more slowly, stopping to pick up leaves and drop them again. Ethan and I sat on the porch steps with coffee while the children moved between the tree and the open field. "They still ask about this place," he said. "Even in town, June especially. She's welcome whenever you can bring her." He nodded and watched the kids for a while. Then he said, "I got a steadier contract starting next month. Not perfect, but better than the last stretch. It won't fix everything, but it helps." "I'm glad." He was quiet for a longer moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "I used to think you were just being stubborn or stuck in the past. I don't think that the same way now. I still need the money, that part is real. But I see that you're protecting something I stopped knowing how to protect. I don't know if I'll ever get that back, but I'm glad one of us still has it." I did not answer right away. The words settled slowly. "I'm not protecting it for you," I said finally. "Or even for Grandpa and Grandma, not exactly. I'm protecting it because it's the only place that still feels like the truth of who I am. If I sold it, I would have the money. I would not have the place that made me. I don't know how to explain it better than that." He nodded once. "You don't have to explain it better, I hear you." When they left that afternoon, June hugged me and said she would come back when the snow was deep enough to walk on. I told her I would be here. After the car disappeared down the drive, I stood on the porch until the dust settled and the quiet returned. The light was already lowering. The bare trees stood clean against the sky. The first real snow arrived in early November. It fell overnight, light and dry, covering the orchard and the roof of the house in an even white layer. I woke to the particular silence that only comes with new snow. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the way the light moved across the white ground. Later, I walked down to the lake. The dock boards were dusted white. The water near the shore had begun to form thin ice along the edges. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets and breathed the cold air. The place was the same place it had been in every season I had known. The difference was that I had stayed long enough to see it through another full cycle. I thought about the offers, the numbers, the practical relief that still waited in the drawer if I ever chose it. The thought no longer carried the same sharp pull it once had. It was simply one possible future among others. The future I was living was slower, thinner in money, richer in the quiet record the land kept. I had chosen it again and again, in small daily ways, until the choice itself had become part of who I was. Value is a number that can be transferred on any given Tuesday. Valuable is the accumulated weight of ordinary days spent paying attention. The maple, the listing dock, the same morels in the same place, the child who still wants to return when the snow is deep, the simple fact of still being here when the first snow covers the ground. I walked back to the house. The snow squeaked under my boots. Inside, I hung up my jacket, poured another cup of coffee, and opened the notebook to a clean page. November 8, first snow. Lake beginning to ice at the edges. Orchard quiet and white. I am still here. That is the whole of it, and it is enough. I closed the book and set it on the table. Outside, the light kept changing over the white ground the way it always had, whether anyone was watching or not. I was still watching. And for now, for as long as the place and I could manage, that was the choice I continued to make.